you've ever owned an N64, chances are you know Rareware. They were the only company aside from Nintendo to consistently pump out hit after hit for the thing, and a lot of those games are still fondly remembered today, especially the Banjo games. But as universally loved as Rare is, there are a couple of games they made back then that people don't seem to bring up as often. Maybe they're more roughly aged, or perhaps they just weren't as charming as some of their more popular titles. One of these games was sort of a combination of genres that Rare's been catering to back then. I mean, they're best known for their platformers, their shooters, and racing games, right? So what happens if we combined all of those into one? You get Jet Force Gemini. It's pretty much a third-person shooter with some lighter elements of platforming. It's another one of those games that I used to watch the big kids play when I was really young and I used to go to daycare. All I remember from it is that the kid playing blew up an ant and its body parts went everywhere, and it picked up its head and put it in their inventory, and then they said, "Look, mommy, a head." And we were like 8 or 9 at the time, so for some reason that was like the peak of humor, and we all laughed really hard at it. I don't know why. Kids are weird. I also remember them wearing an ant disguise to go undercover. I always love that sort of thing, Snake Eater being my all-time favorite example.
What do you think you're doing?
This has been a game that I've always wanted to play since then. I know next to nothing about it because that was the only time I ever saw it in action, and I never really see anybody talk about it anymore. You know, come to think of it, I don't think I've ever covered a Rareware game on this channel before. I guess I do like covering the more obscure stuff, so this is probably a good spot to start, huh? This is the only N64 game they made that I never see anybody talk about. Except maybe Mickey Speedway USA, but you don't really think of Rare when you think Mickey Mouse, right? So that's kind of an exception. But yeah, I can't help but to wonder, why does nobody bring this game up anymore? Was it not that good, or did it just get, I don't know, overshadowed by everything else that came out around it? Why don't we play it and find out. Presented in surround sound and widescreen. Dang, that is definitely not something you expect from an N64 game. Well, I don't have a surround sound setup, so I can't comment much on that, but the widescreen is pretty dumb. You do get a proper-ish widescreen, unlike GameCube games that just squish together the image so you can stretch the resolution out to 16:9, but it crops the top and bottom of the image, effectively halving the resolution. If you thought N64 games were blurry and pixely as it was, this is even worse. Not to mention, you can tell this was meant for CRTs with a 4:3 display. On a widescreen TV, you get a black border around the entire game. Thanks guys, but I'll stick with 4:3 for this one. Oh, now that is a title screen. An awesome shot of the characters running through a hallway with music that inspires heroism. It does a great job of immediately communicating exactly what these guys are all about. And can we talk about that title for a moment? Jet Force Gemini? That's gotta be one of the coolest names for a game ever. Jet Force Gemini. Jet Force Gemini. I can't stop saying it. Jet Force Gemini. One thing I really like is how the title screen changes a bunch throughout the game, depending on what characters you have and where you are in the game's story. I don't think I know any other games that do that. Some games will have one title screen change if you complete the whole thing or get 100%, but this is the first I've seen to have a bunch of them. The opening sequence is pretty impressive for N64, especially the colors. Man, this is breathtaking. I mean, they kinda sacrificed the frame rate for it. It is pretty chunky, but hey, it still looks pretty nice. Even the animations, the main dude drinking his space coffee and then crossing his legs, there's a level of detail here that you didn't really see a lot back then. These guys are the Jet Force, Captain Juno, his twin sister Vela, and their dog Lupus. Together, they fight space aliens and save people and stuff. There isn't a whole lot explained about their backstory in-game, but the manual does have a nice blurb explaining what these two are all about. Their parents were murdered by space pirates as children, and ever since, Juno aspired to become a member of the Jet Force so he can prevent others from suffering a similar fate. Pretty similar to the backstory of Samus from Metroid. So these dudes are cruising through space when they get a distress call from an alien race called the Tribals, these koala-looking dudes. The race is under attack by an army of humanoid ants called the Drones, and after responding, the Jet Force finds their ship getting invaded by the drones, and the three of them escape, but end up getting separated. Juno lands on Goldwood, the planet that's under attack, and with no idea where his team went, he meets up with the leaders of the Tribals, and they tell him that they've been enslaved by the drones. Juno agrees to reunite with his team, save the Tribals, and defeat the the drone army. It's a pretty simple plot. There's not a whole lot more than beat the bad guy and save the dudes. You don't really see a whole lot of character development either. You don't even really see that much text throughout the game, which, like, yeah, you don't really expect much story from N64 action games. It's just the very cinematic introduction had me thinking that, I don't know, maybe I was in for a story, and that's all. There is some writing, though, and you will get your dose of that iconic, cynical British humor that Rare is known for. My favorite being when you interact with the ammo and health shops, the third option to exit out of the dialogue. It's not something like, no thanks, or I don't need anything. No, it's, get away from me, you awful thing. Why are we being so mean to this thing for no reason at all? It is so good. So this game is primarily a linear third-person shooter. You'll advance through each level, shooting down ants and saving as many tribals as possible. You can sense the collectathon influence that Rare is known for because you're really collecting these guys. You just walk into them to save them, and then they're added to your item total. Now, the controls took a lot of getting used to. You can walk around freely and jump with the A button, even being able to grab and climb up some ledges, which gives the game a light element of platforming. But the moment enemies are nearby, the controls suddenly change to a more tank-like style. You now rotate left and right instead of walking left and right, and you'll still use the C buttons to strafe, so it's kinda like GoldenEye controls, except walking backwards is straight up tank controls, and rotating backwards is really clunky and awkward, and I could never get a feel for it. For the most part, you'll rely on the auto-aim. You know, you just point yourself in the general direction, and Juno will probably land his shots, but there will be a lot of times you'll have to hold down the R button to switch to the manual aiming, and this is where things get really clunky. If you're familiar with the manual aiming in GoldenEye, like when you hold down R and it does like this, it's pretty much the same deal here. The cursor doesn't stay where you leave it. If you let go of the stick, it snaps back to the center, and the view only changes if you move the cursor to the sides of the screen outside of the dead zones. So it's kind of like turning in like a Wii first-person shooter, except obviously you aim the reticle with a stick and not the Wii remote. It's really awkward, and it requires an uncomfortable amount of precision that you're just not going to get out of the N64 controller. I had a little bit of an easier time with a better stick on my Brawler 64 gamepad, but even then, I found the aiming to be really touchy and oversensitive and difficult to keep the cursor aimed at what I want to aim at, especially since the reticle snaps back to the center if the stick goes back to the middle, so your thumb's gonna be really stressed out trying to keep the stick in very precise spots again and again and again. I did get kind of used to it after a couple of hours, and I certainly did have an easier time quickly disposing of enemies in higher places once I did, but that was more so because I started relying on spray and pray tactics with a machine gun, so I only had to aim in the general direction, and then some of the shots would probably land where I want them to go. I do at least think the movement was well mapped though. Being able to strafe with the C buttons made dodging oncoming fire more than doable, though I do admit that doing that while trying to free aim is way too hard to do. In some areas I found the difficulty to even spike because of it. Dodging and shooting at the same time is just way too difficult to pull off with these controls. Each level gives you 3 lives, which I did think was the perfect amount of them. If a level was difficult, dying 2 times was usually the sweet spot of mistakes I had to make to kind of figure things out. If I died one more time after that, I always felt it was totally on me. You just gotta keep an eye on your health when the going gets tough. I mean, it's kind of a weird looking health bar. At first I was like, what am I even looking at here? I had no idea what this thing was supposed to be telling me. It's so bulky and odd looking, but basically the outer circle is your health meter, and each one of the 5 green lights on the thing in the middle, they represent another health bar, so I guess think of it like energy tanks in a Metroid game. Once a bar depletes, one of these green lights disappears, and then another health bar appears in its place. Try to be careful when you're playing with explosive weapons, because it's pretty easy to knock out a lot of your energy tanks with them if you're not being cautious. Oh, that's one thing that's really cool about this game. There's a lot of different weapons you can unlock. I found the machine gun to be the most consistently reliable weapon since, again, it doesn't exactly require precise aiming, especially for airborne enemies that come in swarms. You practically need it for those because there's a lot. You just go, yeah, you just spray and pray, it works. But there is other weapons that I liked a lot too, like the shotgun. It was really satisfying to use. You're charging up a shot and you blast an ant to pieces. Or the rocket launchers. These are also pretty good for those drone swarms, but they're also great for sending body parts flying in every direction. Ooh, damn, this is kinda gory for an N64 game. I can tell they went with bugs so they'd only get a T rating, but for a lot of kids in the late 90s, this was like their first gory video game. They don't just bleed, you blast these things to pieces, and I can't lie, it's pretty sick. Beating enemies in this game is just super satisfying because of it, and there's something about ants, dude. I just love to rip off their heads. Be careful though, because in the midst of the chaos, it is possible to accidentally do the same to the tribals you have to rescue. Good lord, it's one thing to watch these ants blowing up, but I can't help but to feel awful watching these cute koala guys getting killed. I feel like a bad person when it happens. Whether you rescue them or kill or ignore them, it actually doesn't affect your progress at first. In fact, it's actually sort of pointless trying to get them all because there's a bunch in levels that you can't get until you return later in the game with new abilities. And replaying a level means resetting all of the tribals, so you have to get them all in a single go. You can't just return and get the ones you haven't got yet, but this whole thing is more relevant later, so I'll save this point for further on in the video. Your main objective for now is simply to reunite with your team, and it's pretty cool how they handled this. Each character is at one end of the galaxy, and you'll hop from planet to planet playing through a unique sequence of levels so they can all meet at the center. It's sort of like having 3 simultaneously ongoing campaigns, and you can even switch between the characters freely once you have them all unlocked. It doesn't even matter what order you finish them in either, so you're free to play through them at whatever pace you want. At certain points you'll encounter a boss fight, and some of these were pretty damn hard, especially this Mantis boss. It's a really long fight and you can't replenish your ammo during it, so you gotta make sure those shots count. During these fights you're locked to a rail. You can no longer freely move, but instead you can only use the C buttons to strafe left and right, which was a really good idea considering that now you can focus on aiming without having to worry about moving in any more than 2 directions. That said, the clunky aiming still made these parts much more difficult than I think they needed to be. The set pieces are pretty damn cool though. The bosses are always gigantic and cool looking, and the settings in which you fight them in are usually pretty interesting. Like a giant bug chasing you down a river of lava as you fire away at him. It's pretty cool. The presentation in this game is easily one of its greatest strengths. The character models are very highly detailed for N64. I mean, the promotional renders do look kind of ugly in my opinion, but I do really like the core designs here. They at least look better in-game than their high-res counterparts, that's for sure. There's some pretty amazing details in this game, like this cutscene right here. They spill a bucket of water, and as it flows, you start to see the character's reflection in the puddle. That must have been mind-blowing back then. And sometimes, when they're overwhelmed, the ants will drop their guns and surrender. Wow, that's so cool. Usually you have to kill everybody in the room to unlock the door though, so sometimes you have to kill them anyway. Sorry. Jesus Christ. I think I just violated Intergalactic Geneva Convention. The environments are very detailed and well thought out. Each area really does feel unique, with a great variety in settings and room geometry. I never found myself lost because each room looked unique enough and had enough landmarks for me to keep my sense of direction. And even better, there's these handy logos beside each door to help you know which way you're going. A red marker means the door brings you back to a room you've already been to, and a green marker means you're advancing forward through the level. And the doors that end the level are marked with these handy hologram flag thingies, so you don't accidentally leave the stage before getting everything you need. Legibility is something I think is very important in level design. It's important to have ways to make the levels easy to read and understand so you can navigate them properly, and this is something Jet Force does really well. I love the variety in settings too. You'll go through forests, swamps, volcanoes, even the innards of a giant worm. One of my favorite levels was this abandoned space station. It's almost pitch black, with only the pulsating emergency lights of the hallways brushing past you again and again. Oh, and the music here, it's so good. It's both creepy and mysterious. It makes you want to explore and find the space station's secrets, but it keeps you on edge in the process. It reminds me a lot of Lost Colony from Sonic Adventure 2, and I know a lot of people don't really like the mech stages that much, but I always thought this was a really underrated level. I love the calm ambience because it's mixed with these guitars. I like to think that music has a language, like it's trying to say something, so it's like the guitars interrupting the ambience. That's Eggman stomping into such a peaceful and empty setting. Jet Force's soundtrack is pretty dang good overall. It's a great blend of this heroic orchestra and the kind of ambience that comes with alien planets in outer space. Now, while this is a superb looking game for its time, the performance definitely suffers for it. The game rarely stuck to a consistent 30 FPS for me, and the frame rate really hits the floor whenever the action heats up. I know Rare loves to push the hardware to its limits, but when you can really tell the hardware is being pushed, I don't really think it's always a good thing. Was it a worthy sacrifice? Well, I guess we wouldn't have games like this to learn from and admire in specific ways if everybody played it safe with performance, so I do at least appreciate them trying to push the hardware, even if it did sacrifice smooth gameplay. So each of the 3 playable characters all have their own unique ability. Juno's suit lets him walk through lava, which looks cool, but it makes this cartoony splish-splash sound when you run through it, and that's kinda silly. Vela, on the other hand, she can swim underwater, so she can access tunnels and areas that others can't get to, and Lupus, he's got jet boots that let him hover through the air. These abilities aren't really used that much throughout the main game though, with the exception of Lupus, of course. You're going to be using that boost all day long. But Juno and Vela's abilities are so unused for the first chunk of the game that I had no idea what even made them unique from each other. It's not until the end game where you all meet up that I found out you need to replay older levels as different characters to access certain areas so you can rescue all of the tribals. So yeah, here's the turning point. Once you all meet up, you need to take down the Mizar? I'm gonna say Mizar because it sounds like miserable, but maybe that's what it is. It's the leader of the drones, the giant ant guy, and he's set on a collision course for Earth because he's like, you guys are trying to stop me? Where you from? Earth? I'm gonna destroy your planet, okay? Screw you guys. So you gotta stop that. But the problem is, your spaceship is not fast enough to catch up with him. But luckily, the tribal leader, he's got a ship that is fast enough and can get there in no time flat. But the problem is, in order to use this thing, you have to repair it with the 12 missing ship pieces, including one that this guy himself has, but he won't give it to you until you've rescued every single tribal in the game. So this is the point in the game where the pacing takes a really weird shift. In order to play the final mission, you have to replay every single stage in the game, searching for those 11 ship parts and rescuing every single tribal. It goes all Metroid on you and has you researching the entire game for the things you have to get. And I do like the idea of this. I do enjoy returning to older areas with new characters to see what new spots I can discover, but the way it's handled is really tedious. Since leaving a level resets your progress in it, you could spend 20 minutes gathering every tribal just to realize the last 2, you need a different character for it. So you make the swap to the character you need, and guess what? They're where you left them, on a different planet entirely, so you have to bring up the map, select the level you want, watch the long cutscene of the ship going all the way there, and then the whole level starts over. This happened to me a lot of times. Like, I was replaying this swamp level as Vela because I thought, oh, she can swim underwater, it's a swamp. Maybe there's some tribals down there I can get as her. But then I get to this hatch door after playing for 20 minutes and I'm like, oh yeah, only Juno can open this. Guess that was a waste of 20 minutes. Time to start the stage over. And to make matters even more annoying, there are some levels where you need one character to find the ship part, but a different character to find all of the tribals. So while Vela could swim underwater to the ship piece, I still needed to switch back to Juno and reset the level's progress to get the remaining tribals. There is some cool stuff in this last stretch though, like for starters, you get a jetpack. You can use it by standing on these tiles and then you charge it up and you can fly up to an area that you could not get to before, and that is a lot of fun. And there's also these tiles that disguise you as another character entirely. One level has Vela disguising herself as a tribal to get a ship part from an NPC. Another one has you going undercover as an ant and going into an ant nightclub, big bug fun club. What the hell is this? What is going on here? This rules. Anyway, so it took me frickin' forever, but I finally get all of the tribals and the ship parts, and now I'm ready to face off with MIM Mazar. I still don't know how to say that. This fight is really difficult, and not because his attacks are hard to dodge or because it's difficult to land hits on him, but because this one single attack he does drains like all of your health in mere seconds. You could be having a really good run, and then whoops, my leg brushed the laser beam, so half of my health is gone. I don't know, man. I think this was a really dumb and cheap way of making this guy difficult. It would be more fair if this attack did less damage and they gave small buffs to his other attacks. That would balance it. I didn't really think the ending was anything special. It's just the typical A New Hope ending where they're given medals for their brave actions. I always found these endings kind of underwhelming, you know? Like, I'd much rather see a falling action that properly wraps up the character development instead of just being like, you did it, good job, here's a trophy, here's a medal. I don't know. At least the credits are pretty great. Do you know when the gang danced the night away to some disco music? That's pretty fun. Well, I guess we may as well take a look at some of the extra stuff because there's some of that here. If you were wondering why you can pick up these heads of ants after you kill them, it's to unlock cheats. It's no GoldenEye though, you're not gonna have this big fun toolbox of dumb stuff to play with. No, it's just 3 of them. The first one is a rainbow blood cheat. Is it just me or does this just make it way more gross? Like, I always thought green blood was way grosser than red blood, but when you got purple and blue and yellow spilling out of you as well, yuck. I don't know what it is, it's just, ugh. The second one is Jet Force Kids. What is that, like Tom and Jerry kids? It gives the characters smaller proportions to make them look like little kids, which, I don't know, it's kind of fun, I guess. You know, with the bigger head, it kind of makes them look like Toa Gali from, like, the OG Toa set. Man, I really miss Bionicle. They were pretty dope. The last one is the best one by a mile, Ants as Pants. It turns the enemies into these goofy snowman-looking stick figure guys. It only seems to affect the very basic enemy types though, like the shield ants and sniper ants, they were unaffected, it was just like the normal ones. While this cheat is a lot of fun, it's just not worth the trouble of unlocking. You need 100 heads to get Rainbow Blood, which you'll probably have by the end of the game anyway, but you need 200 for Jet Force Kids and 300 for the last one. And the worst part is, the totals don't stack between the 3 characters. They each have their own unique head count, so if you get 100 as all 3, it doesn't count. You need 300 on a single character. Took me like an hour of grinding the same level over and over just to unlock these. I really wouldn't bother with them if I were you. We've also got a couple of bonus racing stages. This one plays like a typical racer, and you do have to beat it to get one of the ship pieces. I didn't really like the controls though. I found them a bit touchy. I felt the steering was just way too sensitive. And there's also these bonus arcade racing levels that are top-down. Think Top Ride from Kirby Air Ride. It's pretty much identical to that, especially in how it controls, like the Freestar. You just move the stick in the direction you want to go, rather than steering. I know it's supposed to be a throwback to RC Pro Am, but I felt it played closer to Top Ride. And yeah, I know that Kirby Air Ride came out way after this game, but they're both out now, so I'm allowed to draw comparisons to help people understand how this thing plays. That's all I'm doing. But yeah, this is just a side thing with no bearing on the main game. However, if you can beat the high score on both cabinets, which is like really hard by the way, especially the second one, because you have to really rely on RNG to spawn in these blue medallions to give you enough boosts, because otherwise I swear this is impossible. It took me like 2 hours to do, but once you finally do it, you unlock a new racetrack for the multiplayer. Does it look familiar? Well, it should, because this is a track from Diddy Kong Racing. How cool is that? Weird, yeah, but still pretty cool. Speaking of multiplayer, I guess we may as well take a look at that too. Rare's always been known for including multiplayer in their games, especially their shooters, and well, yeah, you sure do shoot each other, but we had a pretty hard time doing that because of these clunky ass controls. Like, we could not get a clean shot on each other, unless we just stood there and didn't move. Riveting gameplay, guys. What else do we got? Oh, there's a rail shooter game where you gotta try and shoot more cutouts than your friend. I know they're supposed to be holding guns, but it just looks like they're playing guitar to me. Winner won. Yeah, no shit. And of course, finally we have the racing. Again, it's not terribly great. The controls are just a bit too sensitive for my liking. I think you're better off just playing Diddy Kong Racing. So, I guess we're done here, huh? Overall, I'd say it's okay, I guess. You know, I think the biggest obstacle for most people is definitely going to be that clunky aiming, but what really soured the game for me was the bad pacing in the game's second half. I don't know, they just really need a better way to change characters, one that doesn't reset the level's progress so you have to do stuff over and over and over again. If this seems like your sort of thing, I'd recommend the Rare Replay version on Xbox One. Not only is the frame rate much better, but the aiming controls are way less clunky, and it also has proper widescreen support this time too. But even with with the fixes to the gameplay and the performance, that still doesn't solve the structural issues I had with the game's second half. I had a lot of people tell me they never finished this game, and now I certainly understand why. Well, I guess I can see why this is one of the lesser talked about Rare games these days. It was super impressive for its time, getting rave reviews back when it came out. Like, Nintendo Power called it the best action game ever for the N64. I guess as a piece of history, it is a cool thing to check out maybe, but otherwise, there's not a whole lot here that makes it worth going back to now. I mean, I guess if you're a really big fan of Rareware, it is at least worth briefly checking out, just to see a bit of an evolution here, because you can tell there's a lot of influence from their past games that ended up in this one. But even cooler, there's a lot of stuff from Jet Force Gemini that got directly carried on over to their next adventure game. Yep, adventure game. This one. Everybody hates it, but I think there's a lot here that's significant, interesting, and very much underappreciated, so screw it. I know I'm in the middle of a big N64 thing right now, but I'm in a very rare mood, so why not? Just a reminder that I have a Twitter. You can follow me if you want to see me tweet dumb bullshit all day, and also we have a podcast on Patreon that is $1 a month. A good way to support the show. Hey! No, that's all I had to say. Goodbye.